Thank you very much. First of all, it's been a long time since I've been here, and it's changed quite a bit. I think for the better. It's really evolved in a way that art is becoming more pronounced and more of a connection to the platform here. I started the gallery in 2001 basically because I was influenced by a number of pretty important museum shows happening. There was a show at the Whitney called Bitstreams, and there was a very big show at SF MoMA called 01010101.org, or I think that was it. And there was another show at the Brooklyn Museum called Digital Printmaking. And I was looking at this, and I was looking at the gallery market, and there really wasn't a gallery there that was really completely devoted and dedicated to this concept of new media. And new media, as you mentioned a little bit, I mean, is a funny phrase, right? Because what is new media? New media is constantly changing, so it gets old very quickly. So it's something that I look at really on a generational level. So I have artists who are 80 years old who were practicing new media in the 60s and 70s. Of course, they have continued to evolve their practice, but it's super important to understand that new media is really connected to the moment in time and what's available to the artists. And of course, technology is key to all of this. I mean, without technology, new media doesn't exist. It allows artists to go to places that are not possible with traditional tools. So really, it's essential to think about these terms. And I mean, as I say here, what is new media art? There's always an experimental notion about it. It really, I would never show in my gallery a traditional painting or sculpture or photography. Not that I don't like that work, but there's, it doesn't fit within the model I'm trying to promote. And the creative process and execution, as I said, is always influenced by new technologies. And I'll talk more in the conversation about how different technologies have had different impact on the creative process. As I said, it's defined per generation. And what's really important, because everyone keeps talking about the screen is certainly one part of this, and it's a very important part of the presentation of media art. But really, it's the presentation across a range of media. And again, although I said I may not show a traditional painting, I would show a painting in my gallery that has a different sensibility, a different process, an execution that goes beyond traditional techniques. For example, Adi Wagenknecht creates paintings using drones, or an artist can use algorithms to output certain painting pieces. So the alternative media is crucial, and it's also very crucial to the commerce side of it. Because although I do love moving image and time-based media, practically you can't only focus on the moving image. You have to also have artworks that are embedded in the contemporary culture and language. So I'm only going to focus today on time-based media, just because I don't have a lot of time. But art really that is dependent on technology and has a durational dimension is how I define time-based media. And all the following works that I'm going to show you are actually in collections. They've been purchased by both museums and private collectors all over the world, because I kind of wanted to show that there is a market and it's strong. And it's also very important for me to show you a range of types of time-based media. And the other thing that keeps coming up, which is it's controversial typically when I say this, but is the term digital art. I don't really like using that phrase very much. I understand why people use it, but really, in terms of this concept of ghetto and having people look at it differently. I mean, for me, my goal, especially to succeed in the contemporary art market, is for people to look at it as art. It has to be art, because once you start having new definitions of it, it becomes very complicated to sell a piece of art. So digital, although digital technologies are used in the creation of media art and new media and time-based media, I don't like to phrase it as digital art. So I'm just throwing that out there. But we can talk about that. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of stuff here. It's really, it was a great pleasure when I started to work with Beryl Carote. One, she's a female artist, which there aren't as many female artists practicing media art, which is important for me to focus on. But also she was working in this medium in the 70s, which was really pretty amazing. And this particular work, Text and Commentary, was recently shown at the MoMA, and it was acquired by the MoMA, I think around 3 years ago. And this is a classic example of combining a range of media. And also what's cool about this idea is that she went and looked at kind of the initial historical foundation of computation, which is the loom and weaving. So she basically merged a multi-channel video installation with physical weaving. And here's a small example of the 5-channel piece. Also what's, how do I pause this? Okay, cool. So what's interesting about this particular piece from a conservation perspective, so that's a whole other conversation we'll get into, but if you think about when this piece was done, it was created in the 70s, so the aspect ratio of video screen was actually 4:3, not 16:9. So when we sold the work in the late 2000s, of course, all the screens were now 16:9. And it was a bit of an effort to find proper 4:3 screens. And we also wanted to think to the future about how this piece would be presented. So what she did initially, she had the foresight to, and it's quite simple, but all she did is basically, oh, that's me. Wait, what happened? Okay. There we go. So all she did, she masked the screens. So like forever, whatever happens in the future, however weird or strange the formats get, she basically masked them because she wanted to have this kind of more square relationship to the work. So this was just something like when you're trying to sell this work, it's super important to understand how the intentions of the artist and also basically what's going to happen in 20, 30, 40, 50 years if the formatting and the presentation needs to be a certain way. And this is crucial and something we work at very hard at the gallery. And this was a really cool example of an older work surviving. And the other thing which was cool about this work was the medium, of course. It was not digital when it was created. So it was on a synchronized DVD system, which was called, I think it was a Davy Jones system, which was very effective and it worked well, but is mostly disappearing right now and not easy to get. So the museum really required us to migrate the work, and migration is a super important aspect to what we do at the gallery. I ask really every artist we work with to have a plan, because it's essential. I won't work with an artist who ignores this part of making, producing, and selling, because we're the people who get called, we're the people who get abused when there's no concept or ideas about how this works, the work will exist in the future. I'm just going to go through this quickly because I probably have too many pieces here, but this is another really very significant video artist named Gary Hill. Also very, very well collected around the world. This was a really nice integration of kind of performance, sculpture, video, and this piece was done in the 90s. We just recently showed this work at Art Basel in Switzerland.
Tangent to my finger.
So this is actually, what you're seeing there is what was projected onto the speaker itself, onto the pipe.
Forming another skin. the skin of myself circulating with self-corrective
So he
pressure,
actually filmed
forming
and
a skin
spoke to this process. It was like a
space where I
performative
voice
action dealing with the speaker, and then
The
he
skin
then
is
realized it
always
again on
forming,
the object.
shedding itself. I have my finger on it, moving it. I have
But
my
again, another
finger
cool
upon
idea
my-
here was like this was a completely different piece when he built it in the 90s. So I said to him when we went to the art fair, I can't really present this work to collectors in its existing format. We have to make sure that it is current and can exist a bit into the future. So it was quite a process watching him do that with the work. And the other category of work is just pretty traditional video art in a sense. You're going to see a lot of this artist Quayola around. He's doing quite a few projects with Neo, which I'll be speaking about in a second. His work, a lot of it deals with studying nature and using computational vision algorithms to distort that, which then becomes very much an abstract work. This piece is a diptych version of a work, Pleasant Places. Is another interesting topic because the way of presenting it, unlike buying a physical object which is basically in its form, exists in its form, screen-based work like Quayola and the one I'm about to show you, when you acquire that work, it actually, there's a number of ways to present it. So unlike Beryl's work, which I showed you, and Gary's work, the artist defined that experience. That experience has to stay that way into the future. When you buy a single channel video work, the first thing I'm going to ask the collector is basically, where are you showing it? How do you want to show it? What scale? Do you have a sound system? So there's all these elements that have to go into the presentation and all these options, which are quite nice, which Ulvi was saying, which is really special, is that it's not stuck in this place where you have to do this and it's forever there. Like video art basically can go from a 40-inch screen to a 95-inch screen to a 200-inch screen, and it can drastically change how that work is experienced in your home or in a museum. But in many cases, the artist also dictates the specs of that. So there may be a maximum or a minimum size. So in this work, Jonathan Monahan, unlike Quayola, who's filming the work and then addressing it, Jonathan Monahan, who also is present here, his work is completely created using computer graphics. And he really is in this kind of the vein of a And also that work, the computer graphics work, really when I started the gallery in the early 2000s, you really didn't see that level of quality. I mean, the equipment was way too expensive. It just, the skill sets were not there for individual artists to produce almost film quality, movie quality graphical images. So that's something I saw really evolve over the past maybe 6-7 years. The next type of work that's time-based is generative. So I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you, because I'm at Ars Electronica, understand the term generative, but just to define it again, generative is not a looping piece. Generative is not a fixed time period. It's basically forever changing based on a set of code. It's typically run on a computer. And probably, I would say, has been the most important part of the growth of the gallery, is the integration of generative work versus these fixed systems. And the other thing that in this particular case, Sybren Viersteeg did in this piece called Like, the piece isn't only generative, it's actually tapping into the internet. So that's a whole other aspect where the artists are dealing with live content. So in this piece, it's actually using Google search, and he created an algorithm that's building a painting on one side. That's the beauty of the work. But what's also interesting, Google is always evolving and changing. So the piece actually will get smarter over time and eventually will start to get, more accurate in terms of how it's interpreting this abstraction. Another type of generative screen art was created by Marina Zerkow. Instead of tapping into this outside source, the internet, Marina actually built a whole database of animations. And these animations in this particular series called More and More were based on all these, each country, she chose that was doing a lot of exporting. She was very fascinated with the oceans and what's happening with the oceans and all these iconographies that came from these symbols that people are using in the shipping business and commerce. And she basically creates all these thousands of hundreds of drawings, and then based on the time of day, certain elements come out through the drawing. So it's, again, forever changing. Even though the days may be consistent, the elements that appear throughout the day are quite different. So here's another piece, actually, that Beep is actually showing here by Daniel Kanagar. It's a similar piece. And this was also a really interesting evolution, which was not only generative, it now, well, three things are happening here. It's generative, it's a video, and it's actually a sculpture. So this was an amazing, amazing evolution for, I think, artists in general, which is the ability to get away from the rigid box of the screen, the flatness and the stiffness of it. And Daniel Kanagar started researching this technology and the ability to actually now manipulate the screen into very interesting forms. There's still constraints on how far you can go, but it's the first time we ever worked with an artist who was actually creating objects out of a screen. And he's actually, I'll show you in a bit, has created now enormous large-scale public pieces based on this idea. And this piece in particular is also generative in that the activity on the screen is actually being manipulated by real-time data. In this particular one, I think it is, which one is this? I don't know if it's weather. I think it may be weather. So depending on the weather, the colors, the tones, and the movement of the piece will react. And here we go. Here's a large-scale one. So I'm also very interested in large-scale public art for media. I think it is a massive opportunity in the market for artists, I think for the public to enjoy this next level of art experience. And we've been really working pretty hard at trying to get large-scale public works placed around the world. This particular piece was installed around a year ago at the Tampa International Airport. And the work is, again, this sculpted video object. This is also generative, so the objects you're seeing appear. He referenced the indigenous plant species in Florida and used them as a reference point to create new species of flowers. So again, this piece will never change. It's always basically developing new animations based on these original plant life. And what's also interesting, what we told the collector, just because if you think about this, there's this massive object that has been built, which was quite expensive. The artist, I talked with the artist, and we agreed that we can actually offer the collector a new animation every few years. So they can actually keep this beautiful object that was created, and if they want to have a new piece, we would offer that to them, obviously for a much, much lower cost. So this is, I have to show this just because it's a classic, and it's, I think, what did he show here? I think the trash mirror, do you remember what Rosen showed here? I think it was the maybe it was the trash. Oh, here he showed the penguins.
Not here, but in Berlin.
Oh, okay. So this is, it's not really time-based, this is more of a classic kinetic object, but he's really quite famous for this work, and it's really quite special. It's kind of the ultimate merging of traditional and digital. So basically it's a wooden mirror. So they're physical pixels based on light and shadow that interpret the image as it sees it. And what's interesting about this work is that even when it's off, there's a beautiful object. So that's the other thing. Again, getting back to the screen is black when it's off. Certain objects that are active can be turned off and be treated as these sculptural objects, and there could be a dialogue with the art without them being physically on. Raphael Lozano-Hemmer. So this is another example. So interactive screen art. This is another category of work that we've been showing. And Raphael Lozano-Hemmer, who also, I'm assuming he's had a Golden Nika back in the day. He is very, very well known. He's doing museum shows all over the world. He just had a show at the Contemporary Art Museum in Montreal, and we'll have a show at the Hirshhorn in October. He's very interested in surveillance and privacy and how the public interacts with the work in different ways. And this piece also is tapping into, again, getting back to these cultural issues of media, this ever-present issue of tracking and surveillance. So when you walk up to this piece, it's actually looking for your eyes. Once they're locked in, your body splits. And as other people enter the work, they become part of this experience. And also what was cool, in this case, we worked with Barco. But I don't know if you guys know Barco, but Barco is a super high-end screen and projection company, and they are very interested in our program because we're giving them interesting content. And they provided this screen, which was a very beautiful, unusual screen that we used in the art fair in Miami. I think this is the last work, and this is probably Raphael's most famous work, and also is dealing with the physical object. It's bringing in more of this idea of bio art, which I also have seen a lot here at Ars. This piece is collected by the MoMA and other various institutions. It is merging kind of human emotions, again, with technology. So when you walk into this room, you're grabbing onto a sculpture, and that sculpture is sensing your heartbeat. Your heartbeat gets translated to the light above. So everybody who's touched that sculpture in the room is leaving their heartbeat behind. So it's super emotional, beautiful, elegant presentation, but using technology. So it's really softened the work where, again, it's an artwork. It's an emotional art installation. It's not so much about technology anymore. Oh, sorry, one more. So this last one, sorry, this is just a really cool one. So Raphael also did a piece recently which showed in Basel called Zoom Pavilion. Again, this is getting back to face recognition, tracking, etc. But this one he did on a very large scale. So as you walk into the room, you're basically, it's tracking you. It's tracking people who are next to each other. So as there's a connection made, these two faces are put up on the screen. And everyone goes in there thinking this is like playful. They all want to do their selfies and Instagram. But this piece is a super aggressive piece based on basically military technology for targeting bombing areas. But no one even thinks about that. So there's a lot of this, contemplation that sometimes is missed when you walk into these pieces, but this piece has a real serious underlying idea behind it. Okay, that's done. Thank you.